Marian and Larry have something promising going on, with many fans afraid Bertha might interfere to ruin this relationship. Still, it's a super slippery ground with how the pair is going about it, which the Gilded Age strictly forbids. When it comes to romantic relationships in the show, Marian has misjudged men in the past and must be careful with Larry to avoid things going wrong again. And she isn't the only lady with this problem. Peggy also has a dark past and must navigate her newfound friendship with the Doctor carefully, as the Gilded Age takes a harsh stance on women who make courtship errors, which we will unravel soon. Larry has the liberty to play around, which he did with the widow earlier in the show, which is why Bertha thinks Marian is another fling for Larry. The truth is, Larry might be right for Marian, but he has been pretty careless with her by pushing for romance before actually declaring the intention to marry her. The person this would end up hurting the most is Marian, as we discuss how romance and courtship work in that era and how they get it right or mess it up. In the Gilded Age, people were always watching and knew about two people hanging around without a chaperone or formal courtship. This means people suspect Larry and Marian are into each other, but also know there's nothing proper between them because they are going about it all wrong. That's also why Bertha isn't taking the relationship seriously. If it were, they would have gone through a different route rather than just playing around. Kissing, an exercise that Larry and Marian had been caught doing more than once, was considered vulgar and unacceptable even for married couples in that era in public. So, public display of affection was strictly frowned upon as indecent. In that era, being pure and meek was rewarded with respect. Some things aren't expected of people who hold a certain level of importance in society through their family background, monetary status, or profession. If a young lady was well learned on the topic of kissing, they were taught to appear clueless on the subject whenever they hear such vulgar language. So kissing was extremely sacred, and no matter how in love two people were, it was best to keep things very respectable and go through the due process to court. And even though Marian is afraid and holding back because of her past experiences, Larry is being led by his emotions rather than logic, without first suggesting they court properly before anything else. Courtship in that era was much like dating today, but in a more reserved way. Courtship is a critical and special period for young couples. It usually takes place after introductions, but before a formal engagement. Larry and Marian have been introduced, but there's a borderline where they are neighbors and their families have already met, but the intentions for their introduction weren't explicitly set. So by now, in their case, they are supposed to be officially courting and looking forward to an engagement. Still, essential talks have yet to be held, which places their relationship in a complicated situation. However, as we've pointed out, courting in the Gilded Age is a critical phase for intending couples. It allows them to get to know each other better and is a big step in deepening the already established romantic feelings. In that era, marrying for money and position was very popular, as Gladys was set up for, but marrying for love was also common and popular among young people. Through courtship, a couple can discover other similar interests and temperaments. It's also a way to ensure they admire and respect each other. So in that era, a man who appreciates a lady wouldn't start kissing her in tricky places and vulnerable situations without properly courting her, which means Larry is making a big mistake, no matter how interesting the circumstances appear. In that era, romantic love was enough to set a solid foundation for a successful marriage, just like it is today. So Marian and Larry have that sorted for when they start courting appropriately. Courtship in that era was exciting, hopeful, desirable, and filled with sweet expectations for the couples. Although young women married for love in that era, they also carefully considered how to become comfortable in their marriage. The women of the Gilded Age had high, luxurious tastes and didn't want to live any less than their counterparts in society. They enjoyed love even more with a generous bank account and were more likely to favor a young man with more money over one with little. However, romance in the 19th century was governed by some very strict code of social etiquette. Only respectable gentlemen in society could call on women who were out in society. As a young girl in that era, the proper age to debut in society was after the girl had had a formal education. Also, maturity level was considered before age in that era, but the average age to debut in society was around 18 to 20. A young woman out could now attend balls and parties in the company of her mother, aunt, or an older female relative who acts as the chaperone, where there are usually suitors. Throughout the show, Gladys is mostly always in the company of her mother or another woman in society while attending these events, and sometimes her brother accompanies her to these places. Unlike women in society, men had few to no rules that could affect their reputation. However, women had to be very careful, just like Marian is trying to, because they were often judged for being too eager. A book from 1881, Our Deportment, cautioned, saying, "No well-bred lady will too eagerly receive the attention of a gentleman, no matter how much she admires him, nor, on the other hand, will she be so reserved as to altogether discourage him. So, a woman could do too much or too little to the detriment of her future and stance in society, which is why Marian is in a tricky situation. She must be careful not to let words leak about her irregular behaviors with Larry, while also avoiding being too cautious that she discourages Larry. The rules of formal introduction and courtship are known by heart to the upper classes, who grew up learning and passing this knowledge on to younger generations. However, for the new money, like the Russells, they provide etiquette books to guide them on how to behave in every social situation. Knowing and abiding by these important details indicates one is of a high social status and a moral character. The courting etiquette was pretty straightforward, as the men would sit with their intended in the parlor, sometimes in the presence of a chaperone or someone lurking nearby to give the young people a little privacy to discuss. Calling a lady at home was the standard practice, but other enjoyable activities and outdoor exercise started becoming popular among courting people in the Gilded Age. They had theater excursions, carriage drives, horseback riding, and others. The intended couple gained freedom, privacy, and a tiny opportunity to hold hands by engaging in these physical activities. Kissing was extreme and forbidden, as they rarely think of it or consider it. Young people in love often write letters to each other to deepen their connections. The man usually uses the letter to ask the woman out to accompany him on any activity that tickles their fancy and allows them to spend considerable time together. They also exchange gifts like Christmas and Easter cards while courting. And following courtship is a proposal that Marian had gone through before but failed. Once a man is ready to propose, after gaining the approval of the lady's family to go ahead, he is encouraged to ask in person, which Billy never got the confidence to achieve with Gladys. It was instructed in Our Deportment how a proposal should work, and it reads, "A spoken declaration should be bold, manly, and earnest, and so plain in its meaning that there can be no misunderstanding." Again, a woman is warned against being too eager to accept a proposal, and also cautioned not to say no twice to a proposal she plans on accepting, which is very amusing, as it means she should say no once to show she's not too enthusiastic and also not willing to throw the relationship away. And abiding by all of these slippery rules gets even more complicated, because if a lady wishes to refuse a proposal, she must show respect and kindness in her response. Also, it was very much improper to keep a gentleman in suspense or continue to play with his emotions without intending to accept. However, if they had a successful engagement and needed to end it, it was best to do so by letter, clearly expressing the reason. A break of engagement is usually accompanied by the return of gifts and photographs shared during the engagement. Then, with time, the romantic wounds began to heal, preparing for either fresh wounds or a romantic cure, as Marian had done, preparing for something that could be tragic or a blessing with Larry. Following the engagement is the wedding ceremony, which the Gilded Age 3 documents with a huge one that details what an upper-class wedding in that era was like. The brides in the Gilded Age mainly chose the white wedding dress, which became popular after the 1840 wedding of Queen Victoria to Albert of Saxe-Coburg. In the 1880s, the fashion was white silk or brocade with a long tulle veil or lace with a wreath of flowers. Orange blossoms were also very common, as they signified purity, and it's on the wedding day that the couple can finally kiss and never be seen outside performing any public display of affection again, despite being married. For a couple who married for love in the Gilded Age, Valentine's Day parties were taken very seriously, as they were very much in vogue among the upper-class houses. The dining room is often decorated for Valentine's Day, as they cut out many hearts, paint them red, sew them together, and string them along the candelabra with red flowers. As their affection for each other continues to thrive, as witnessed by society, the couple must maintain their morals in society as before marriage.